A few birds got in the way of a moving coaster train and hit the supermodel in the face. Amusement park employees, what is your horror story? I operated a few different roller coasters during my fun-filled summers at this amusement park, but most of my horror stories come from one ride in particular. The train was one of the ones that you had to step into, with a lap bar restrained. On one particular day, it was over 100 degrees and the ride had been running as usual for most of the morning. As we were loading the train, a guest came up to me to say that there was an awful smell coming from the front car, and my stomach immediately dropped. Usually with these types of complaints, we'd find that the previous rider had one too many slushies before riding and had lost their lunch. Gross, but we were used to cleaning that kind of stuff. I started approaching the front car and immediately called for my coworker to direct everyone out of the train and back into the line, and to call our supervisor to close the ride. Instead of a normal puke situation, I found a greenish-brown liquid spread all throughout the front car, from the seat down to the floor. Whoever was the last person to ride the ride had shat all over themselves and hadn't bothered to tell anyone about it. Cleaning human feces is one thing, it's absolutely disgusting, but it can be done. But trying to clean up human diarrhea in 100+ degree weather, off of the floor of a car where you had to kneel down and stick your head into the car to reach the very front, is a situation that I never would have imagined even in my worst nightmares. The ride was down for the rest of the day, and it took over an hour to clean everything out of the car before we could start really sanitizing it. I worked on the Dueling Dragons at Universal Orlando when in college. For those who don't know, the Dueling Dragons were two separate coasters that dueled and had several near misses with each other. They were pretty unique at the time and were super fun. As you can imagine, Universal told people to empty their pockets before they rode so that their phones and stuff wouldn't fly out and smack somebody on the other coaster at 60 miles per hour. Of course, many times people would ignore this because they're lazy and stupid. I was working one day when the ride shut down completely. Change had flown out of someone's pocket and hit a guy in the eye, leaving him blind in that eye. The tragic part: the guy was already blind in his other eye. Now the guy is 100% blind. They didn't duel anymore after that, and the ride was left permanently much lamer. I still feel for the poor blind guy. But the irony is comedic in a dark sort of way. Was working the first shift opening the park and doing dry runs with the roller coaster. Well, when it came back there was obvious impact on the front car. One of the groundskeepers had headphones and listening to music working through his shift. He died instantly. The following week was a nightmare and I still don't think to this day they have found all of him. I once had to height check a girl who was both mentally and physically disabled. This is just as they're about to get on the ride too, as someone else previously didn't bother to check her height to begin with. So I politely asked her and her carer to come and check her height after lots of no's, and as luck would have it, she wasn't dull enough, of course. She didn't take it well and started screaming, saying she's going to ride no matter what, and after leaving to let the carer tell her to get out, she finally left her seat after about 10 minutes, which is an eternity in roller coaster time. I see her walking off. I mean, yeah, it sucks, but I'm just doing my job. I'm just relieved that she's finally going. But then as she's walking through the exit, she turns around and screams, "I hope you die." So that was nice. It was hilarious but still soul-crushing at the same time. Also, it was my birthday. I quit not long after. A few years ago, a smallish theme park in my state made some kind of mistake when chlorinating the wave pools and made a bunch of chlorine gas, and 26 people had to be taken to the hospital. I was working in an amusement park as a 19-year-old, and was on the turnstile talking with guests and checking everyone off. About 3 in the afternoon, a very young girl, about 6 or so, came up with her father, both in swimwear. Not unusual, since there's a water park attached to the regular park. However, there is a rule in the park that you have to be wearing a shirt to ride the ride, and the girl was in a 2-piece suit. I informed the both of them that the girl needed a shirt, and we would be happy to save their spot in line if she had a shirt she could run and grab. Her father raised his voice and loudly asked why I was looking at his little girl and shouted about me being a pedophile. I backed off and told him he misunderstood, but he kept shouting back to the line behind him about how I was a sicko, and only stopped when park security arrived a few minutes later. One of 2 times I felt like I was actually in danger. The dude was furious. Worked for an amusement park several summers as a teenager, and a haunted house at one, off and on. Neither park I worked at was a dry park, so drunk parents ranked among the worst. The haunted house was particularly fun, as later groups tended to involve drunks. I took a bad kick to the ribs once, while working under an overhang, and we had at least one violent incident a night. For further perspective, most of us were high schoolers and not all that intimidating. For the actual amusement park, the most messed up thing was when I got sent home early once for a bit of weather coming, which wasn't that odd. Said I should have time to get home, though. I lived a half hour away. What I didn't know was I got sent home in a tornado warning. The warning was posted when they sent me home. They knew the line of storms was about to hit. I ended up pulling over after a tree branch hit my car and got stuck in a hailstorm. The roof of my car was dented. No tornado actually touched down, but we had bad straight-line winds. A few other employees were also told to go home and had pretty similar stories too. The woman working the office that day just decided, on her own, we'd be better off going home than staying in the fairly solid, permanent buildings on the premises. AKA, once we were gone, not her problem. I'm not an employee but was a resident of the area at the time. At Busch Gardens, Virginia, a few birds got in the way of a moving coaster train during its grand opening and hit the supermodel Fabio in the face. The news was there to cover the inaugural celebrity ride, but all they'd show for a while was the train returning to the station and Fabio with a face full of blood. Lifeguarding at this lazy river tube pool, basically just tell kids to get back in their tubes all day. These two guys like 30 years old are arguing in Polish or something, floating all around the lazy river. They are on lap 2 or 3 of arguing and really going at it. One of them pulls a knife out of his trunks and stabs the other guy's tube. He walked around to the end with his popped tube while guy with the knife proceeds to just hop all the different fences to get outside the park and is not seen again. Used to work at an amusement park that had a section featuring actors dressed as characters from a certain family-friendly show. The actors for this area were almost exclusively teenagers and were notorious for having sex with each other all around the dressing room, bathroom or backstage areas. This all culminated in 2 of the actors being fired for getting in a fight during a show, because a certain cookie-loving monster made a sex tape with a certain Spanish-speaking monster who was dating a certain television-loving monster. Not really scary for me, but I think a few children were traumatized seeing a costume characters had ripped off during a show. Many moons ago I was an assistant director of training security at a park known for its cartoon mice. While doing the walk around the park with a group of new hires, I got a call about a possible indecent exposure incident at Fantasyland. Knowing that was the most popular place for children in the park, so much more than Toontown, I rushed the new hires through the backstage area to cut travel time. While we were backstage behind the Small World ride, one of my trainees pointed out someone dropping their pants and leaning against the building. Before we had a chance to close the distance between us and the guy, a blast of brownish-yellow liquid exploded outwards in a fan pattern. I stopped the group, got on the radio and informed them of the bio incident, then slowly made my way to the guy. When I was about 10 feet from him, he looked up, smiled, then blasted the wall again. Without a word, he pulled up his pants and started to walk away. His pants were soaked with liquid poop and piss. Before he was able to leave the area, Anaheim police apprehended him. After questioning him, they called for an ambulance. Upon talking with the police sergeant, found out he was a well-known homeless man in neighboring city of Orange, usually picked up for swinging his genital at traffic. The kicker though was, he wasn't the subject of the initial call. When we finally got to Fantasyland, we found out that someone was complaining about a woman breastfeeding. 3.5 years of working there, and that is one of the events that still feels fresh in my mind. I was at a firm in Williamsburg and we represented the Fan family. Timothy Fan was killed in 1999 after dropping out of the Shockwave ride at King's Dominion. He was really small for a 20-year-old, but hit the pavement like a 500-pound man. The photographs of his body were unbelievable. The family lost because King's Dominion, somehow, found witnesses who stated Fan was intentionally loosening his restraints to be able to raise his hands on the coaster. I don't know if anyone is familiar, but the Shockwave is a standing coaster. For someone to want to lift their hands is absurd, and that there were actually witnesses who saw him do it is preposterous. I worked at a water park when I was in high school, not the sort of amusement park most people think of, but still an amusement park. The park had lots of large pools with a shallow section and a deep section, separated by rope. For some reason, parents thought that their kids splashing around in the shallow end qualified them to swim in the deep end. When you're a lifeguard, you're supposed to scan the pool every 30 seconds to check on everyone. 30 seconds is a long time. On more than one occasion, a kid would wander over into the deep end. They would be okay for a few seconds but would panic and start drowning. Unlike what you see in the movies, someone drowning is a fast, silent affair. Splashing is the exception, not the rule. Usually it didn't take too long to spot someone drowning. The problem was that when a guard blew the whistle and jumped in the water, people would start flailing like chickens with their heads cut off. Unless the pool was nearly empty, this significantly slowed things down. And then there's the people that tried to help. Unless you're a qualified guard, stay out of the way. On more than one occasion, kids got pulled from the water pretty damn near death. Giving a kid CPR is not a pretty sight. One kid did die during the time I worked there. Thankfully it was on a day off. I used to be an operations lead on the Jurassic Park ride at Universal Studios Hollywood. One day, I'm working the dispatch board, JP3, sitting in the operations booth when a phone rings. The lead manning the cameras answers, then suddenly slams the emergency stop button, shutting the entire ride down. We'd stopped for a moment so we could offload a disabled guest, and some brain surgeon was annoyed at the delay, so he lifted his kid out of the boat and sent him to call the booth from the emergency phone right next to the Jeep drop effect, which back then was still functional. If we hadn't been shut down, the kid very well could have been killed. We evacuated the ride, and stayed down for 5 hours because we couldn't get the water pumps back up and running. Dad and family were escorted from the park sans refund, though they pitched a fit. Another time, we had a couple of kids running around assaulting the costumed characters and then taking off. We had rough descriptions, and I just happened to be at the front entrance while a character was walking around. I saw one of them making a running approach on the mascot, and threw a nasty block into him as he tried to pass me. He went down hard, and stayed down when another escort dropped on top of him. He and his buddy were arrested, and I got a nice bonus for stopping them. A relative of mine had a friend who was an investigator working this case. We knew a few days before the media got to it that they let her on the ride, even thought they knew she was too large to fit in the seat. The poor ride operator apparently didn't want to offend her or didn't have the heart to tell her she couldn't ride it with her kids. So they had to witness firsthand their mother falling to her death. So tragic and sad, they tried to play it off like there were too many factors to blame it on one thing alone, but it was pretty obvious. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more videos like this. And please don't forget to share your own amusement park horror stories in the comments below.